Between 1754 and 1763, Great Britain and France engaged in a global war. Today, known as the 7 Years' War or the French and Indian War, this conflict took place in Europe, Africa, India, the South Pacific, the Caribbean, and North America. After years of hard fighting on land and sea, the British were victorious, claiming French territories around the world. In North America, they inherited French Canada as well as the Great Lakes region. Victory came at a high price, however, as waging a global war had stretched the British military thin and depleted the royal treasury. As British troops marched into the Great Lakes to occupy posts such as Michilimackinac, they encountered a complex web of relationships between Europeans and the local Native Americans. After the war, many of these native groups, previously allied with the French, did not consider themselves defeated. Instead, they continued to defend their traditional culture and lifestyle, as they had done for centuries. In an effort to cut British costs, Commander-in-Chief Jeffrey Amherst stopped the flow of official gifts to the native leaders. These gifts, which were an important part of native culture and had helped maintain good relations between native and European traders, were now viewed as an unnecessary expense. In addition to maintaining many older French forts, the British built a string of posts deep into their newly acquired territory, attracting an increasing flow of settlers to the undeveloped regions west of the Appalachian Mountains. These settlers displaced native peoples and threatened the very existence of their way of life. Although some British officials and settlers tried to protect the Native Americans, many, including Amherst, viewed the native people with nothing but racist contempt. The native people of the Great Lakes viewed these new British policies with alarm. Mistreated and with their cultural existence threatened, native people increasingly resented the British. At the same time, widespread disease and food shortages ravaged native communities. Out of this frustration and suffering, two leaders emerged. Now Lynn, known as the Delaware Prophet, led a religious revival. Calling for the complete abandonment of everything British, Nowlin promised salvation through a return to traditional native culture free of European influence. Meanwhile, Pontiac, an Odawa war leader, capitalized on Nowlin's religious message and overall native discontent with the British. Holding councils at Detroit in early 1763, he urged native representatives from around the Great Lakes to join him in retaliating against the British intruders. Pontiac himself announced plans to attack the British garrison at Detroit. He hoped that other native leaders would join him in driving the British from the Great Lakes. On April 27th, at one of the last councils before violence broke out, Pontiac spoke to the assembled representatives.
It is important for us, my brothers, that we exterminate from our lands this nation which seeks only to destroy us. You see as well as I that we can no longer supply our needs. Therefore, my brothers, we must all swear their destruction and wait no longer. Nothing prevents us. They are few in numbers, and we can accomplish it.
News of Pontiac's councils at Detroit, accompanied by war belts, traveled swiftly towards Michilimackinac. When Minwewe, leader of the Ojibwa bands who lived near Michilimackinac, learned of Pontiac's plans, he began to formulate his own strategy for attacking the British post on the Straits of Mackinac. Shortly after, he was joined by Michilimackinac, a war leader of the Ojibwa from nearby Sheboygan. Together, they quietly assembled their warriors and pondered how best to capture Michilimackinac.
When I received word of Pontiac's intentions to attack Detroit, I set my mind to the capture of Michilimackinac. I knew that we must outsmart the English rather than overpower them. Michilimackinac and I assembled 400 warriors to surprise the soldiers. These men would play bagataway, or as the French call it, lacrosse, just outside the fort walls. To complete our ruse, I assured the commander that we had come to play in honor of the king. I even invited the captain to watch the match. On the 2nd of June, our men were in place. To the English, it would appear as a friendly game. In reality, all our men needed was the signal to begin the attack.
Diary of Alexander Henry, June 2nd, 1763. The morning was sultry. A Chippewa came to tell me that his nation was gathering to play at Bogoty Way with the Saukes, another Indian nation, for a high wager.
Although he did not know it at the time, even as Henry calmly wrote letters, Minwewe and Majikiwas's plan was being put into action. Outside the fort, Ojibwa and Sauk men played a vigorous game of bagataway. Native women, robed in heavy blankets, sat nearby. Captain George Etherington, together with Lieutenant William Leslie, stepped outside the palisade wall to watch the game.
I myself did not go to see the match, because, there being a canoe prepared to depart on the following day for Montreal, I employed myself in writing letters to my friends. And even when a fellow trader, Mr. Tracy, happened to call upon me, saying that another canoe had just arrived from Detroit, and proposing that I should go with him to the beach to inquire the news, it so happened that I still remained to finish my letter, promising to follow in the course of a few minutes.
Meanwhile, after leaving Henry, Warrant Tracy walked to the lake shore to meet a canoe. Fearful that Tracy would learn of Pontiac's siege at Detroit had exposed their plans, native men killed him as he approached the shore. His killers let out a cry, setting the attack in motion.
Mr. Tracy had not been gone long when I heard an Indian war cry and a noise of general confusion.
Outside the fort, the bagataway players heard the cry and tossed the ball towards Etherington and Leslie, standing near the open land gate. As the players rushed towards the ball, the female spectators began distributing weapons, which they had concealed beneath their blanket robes. Etherington and Leslie were quickly captured and dragged away as the now armed players rushed inside the fort, beginning a ruthless attack on British soldiers and traders.
Going instantly to my window, I saw a crowd of Indians within the fort, furiously cutting down and scalping every Englishman they found. I thought only of seeking shelter. Amid the slaughter, I conceived a hope of finding security in the home of my neighbour, Monsieur Charles Langlade.
Inside, British troops were ill-prepared to resist the swiftly moving attack. Lieutenant John Jamay, armed only with his sword, attempted to fight off several native men until he was killed. Many soldiers were cut down as they attempted to flee from their attackers. Some were scalped while still alive. A few men found shelter in the house of Father Pierre Dugenay, the village's resident Jesuit priest. Others, like Henry, seeking protection in the homes of their French-Canadian neighbors, were not so lucky. At least one Canadian slammed his door in the face of a soldier, leaving him outside to be killed by his pursuers. The attack on Michilimackinac lasted only a few minutes. In that time, Ojibwa warriors killed 15 soldiers, as well as Lieutenant Jamay and Tracy. None of the French-Canadian residents were harmed. Alexander Henry, running to the home of his neighbor Charles Langlade, was briefly hidden in the attic before being discovered and captured. Other traders were similarly hidden until they too were captured by the Ojibwa. In the aftermath of the attack, several French-Canadian residents looted the property of their British neighbors, such as English trader Henry Bostwick and German-born merchant Ezekiel Solomon. Both men watched as Canadians broke into their homes and stole their trade goods. In the following days, Ojibwa warriors killed 5 more captive British soldiers. Following the attack, Charles Langlade, a prominent merchant with Odawa relatives, held councils with the Ojibwa in which he secured the safety of the British captives. With his own garrison captured, Etherington appointed Langlade as Michilimackinac's temporary commander. Thanks to the intervention of Langlade, the Odawa removed Etherington and the other surviving prisoners to their village at Labre Croche. The Odawa, who professed ignorance of the plans to attack Michilimackinac and were apparently unhappy that the Ojibwa had taken the post without first consulting them, were handsomely rewarded with British trade goods for their help and protection. Etherington quickly set up a temporary command post in the Odawa village, even sending for reinforcements from Fort Edward Augustus in what is now Green Bay, Wisconsin. While waiting for these men to arrive, Etherington dispatched Father Dugenay to Detroit with news of Michilimackinac's fall. Soon after, British reinforcements, accompanied by Menominee warriors, arrived from Wisconsin. This combined British native force played a key role in the coming days, acting as a mediator between the Odawa, Ojibwa, and captive British. Following several councils, the Ojibwa agreed to release the remaining British captives and send them by canoe to Montreal under the care of the Odawa and Menominee. Departing on July 18th, these men arrived in Montreal in early August. For Etherington and the other captives from Michilimackinac, the war was over. When Father Duchesne reached Detroit, carrying the news of the capture at Michilimackinac, he learned that the attack had not been an isolated incident. Instead, native warriors had risen against British posts around the Great Lakes. Including Michilimackinac, 8 forts had fallen quickly and violently, their garrisons killed or captured. Forts Pitt and Niagara were attacked, while Pontiac himself led the siege of Detroit. Despite these early successes, the uprising slowly came to a halt. Victorious native warriors simply returned to their homes for the hunting season. Internal divisions and stiffening British resistance similarly doomed the native war effort. British troops slowly returned to the Great Lakes region as the uprising died. British officials recalled Amherst, holding his policies partially to blame for the attacks. His successor, Thomas Gage, moved swiftly to end the violence through diplomacy and military expeditions into captured territory. British troops reclaimed Michilimackinac in 1764. In London, meanwhile, King George III signed the Proclamation of 1763, which formally recognized Britain's new North American colonies. In response to the native uprising, the proclamation limited British settlement to the eastern side of the Appalachian Mountains, creating a separate Indian territory, supposedly free of European intrusion. British officers and Indian Department officials also worked to cultivate new and better relationships with the native groups of the Great Lakes. Forged in war, these alliances of former enemies proved useful in the coming decades as British and native soldiers united against the Americans during the Revolutionary War and the War of 1812. The British fought to preserve their North American colonies. The Native Americans, as they had in 1763, continued fighting to preserve their culture and way of life.